All right, we're back with another episode of the Do Something Good Today podcast, powered by Everybody's Juice. We're here with the good folks of Kinfolk Dispensary. We're here with CEO Corey Barnette, General Manager Vanessa West, and Marketing Manager Jamila Livingston. The marijuana industry has been a lucrative industry for a lot of people, except for people who look like us, black and brown folks. Where would you say, Corey, as the CEO, has there been a turning point where you're starting to see a lot of black and brown people get more involved? Because when you look at it, I was just reading an article, it's just like there are companies that are represented by black and brown people, but still it's like less than 1% of the industry.
So, black and brown people have always been enthusiastic about the industry, right?
Right.
You know, there's never been a shortage of people who want to be in the industry and people who are excited about the industry. But there have always been these barriers, right? And so what we began to see is the advent and the creation and the forethought necessary to create points of access. And so in states that have things like social equity programs, we are starting to see more access and more opportunities and more licenses end up in the hands of owners. I believe it was sometime like around 2014, I was speaking at the National Cannabis Industry Association conference, and I made the comment that ownership waters the soils of progress when it comes to making sure that black people have jobs, making sure that the people that have been hit hardest by the war on drugs get access to the industry, meaning that if we don't own, the likelihood that we're going to get a person like Vanessa, who's now seen the startup of 3 different dispensaries successfully and is currently on a 4th if you consider Kinfolk a startup. You don't see, people in lead marketing positions that look like Jamila if you don't have owners that look like Jamila, right? And so I think one of the things that's starting to create a turn is the development of like social equity programs. Some of the problem, there are some problems with social equity programs in that I don't think that they ask for enough. Certainly here in Washington, DC, we've been able to have a very fertile dispensary market for African Americans and people hit hardest by the war on drugs because we fought for it, right? There was a time when I owned the only black-owned dispensary. Now, most of the dispensaries, or a majority of the dispensaries in Washington, D.C. have majority black ownership. That's not by chance, that's by plan and design, and that's by effort, and that's by working with the city council to really say, nah, we don't want 10%. We don't want 30%. We want our fair share of the pie, and we've been a majority black city for a long time. How is it we aren't giving any of these licenses to? And so it's people who stand up in their states that are making that kind of an argument to legislators boldly and actively that are, I think, helping to create the turn. But certainly we're seeing people get access to opportunities, but then there are all of these barriers that prevent access to safe and success, right? And that's another hurdle that we have to tackle in the industry, frankly, if the people who are winning are truly going to have a shot at surviving.
So let's get into a little bit of you guys' background. Corey, first with you. You have a background in engineering. Did you always have aspirations of getting into the marijuana industry? I know it's a fairly new industry. It's a fairly new legalized industry. So is this something that you kind of a grown aspiration or?
So I definitely remember sitting around my apartment with my roommates, wondering if we could ever make a business out of selling weed, right? I had those aspirations, I guess you could say, but I never thought it would be a reality at that time.
Right,
you know what I mean? I became a mechanical engineer because I was good at math and science. I went to business school because I wanted to be a businessman and I wanted to be an entrepreneur. And I felt like the only way that I could have the things I wanted in life was to actually go after the things I wanted in life, right? So that's what kind of led to it. My background is engineering, then went to business school, then did investment banking, then venture capital, then decided that I wanted to buy a business. And in 2003, I think it was, the first business I bought, and I've just been a serial entrepreneur since that time.
Vanessa, you bring a ton of experience to the marijuana industry. Board certified in California. Can you speak more to your experience and how you got into the marijuana industry?
Sure. So I was living in DC. It's around, I think, 2009, and I was friends with Corey. Corey purchased a dispensary in San Diego. He can probably speak better to the reasons why he thought I would be a good fit. Managing the dispensary in San Diego, but I'm assuming it's because of my 7 years of retail management experience. So I was able to bring that experience to the dispensary in San Diego. We were there for a couple of years, and then things started to get a little tricky with just San Diego laws. So we packed it up and I moved back to DC. And about a year later, Corey won another license. And so I was lucky enough to get back into the industry and start managing his dispensary again.
Jamila?
Yeah, so my background, I actually have a biology degree. So, I mean, like same as Corey, good with like math and science, but it was boring to me. And so I wanted to do something like more fun, something to like show my personality and things like that. I had intentions of being a dentist at first, but I definitely, had my experience consuming. And then once I was like, oh, there's like Black-owned licensed stuff, like that's where I want to be at. So I definitely wanted to be a marketing manager for a Black-owned cannabis dispensary. So when it happened, I was like, oh my goodness, like I definitely manifested this. I definitely was like working towards it, definitely love weed. And so whenever I can talk about my job, but then be like, actually we're like licensed and it's lit and we're Black owned, it makes it like a million times better.
So one of the things that has been kind of prevalent is holistic health, and the pharmaceutical industry has been taking a big hit over the years because people are realizing there are alternative ways to heal themselves than just popping a few pills. So when people start bringing up CBD and THC and things like that, can you kind of explain like what the difference is? Because I think a lot of terms are being thrown out, but I don't think that people truly understand like what the difference is and what CBD and THC really do for the body.
Well, I mean, and you guys can definitely chime in on this as well, but let's start with the fact that the cannabinoid profile of the plant is much greater than just THC and CBD. Right? There's a whole lot of cannabinoids that we're just finding out about. But where we tend to start the customer education process is that when you think of the psychoactive effects of cannabis, that's typically coming from your THC component, right? And it's not to say that it doesn't have other features to it, right? It's also good for pain relief. It's also good for a lot of other things as well. But typically the psychoactive effect associated with cannabis is coming from the THC side. A lot of the more sedative and relaxing effects, the sort of, let's call it body high, for lack of a better phrase, are coming from your CBD cannabinoids in the plant. So that's typically where we start that education process for a customer. They're kind of, walking in the door a lot of times having heard of CBD, right? A lot of people are getting CBD introduced into products that they have in just regular mainstream America inside of a CVS or inside of a Walmart or a Walgreens or something like that. And so they're already used to seeing it in their topicals and things like that. So they're understanding how it makes their body feel. The devil in a red dress, for lack of a better phrase, in the room oftentimes is THC. It kind of gets demonized in a certain way because of the psychoactive effect. But those of us who love cannabis realize that there's a lot of value to putting people into a happier mind state and relaxing people's mental and things of that nature as well. So we don't demonize it; we address it head on, and we believe that it is as critical as every other cannabinoid. From there, we tend to move people to a discussion about the entire entourage effect, right? Or what's called the entourage effect. And what that means is that the cannabinoids are really meant, or data seems to suggest that the cannabinoids are meant to work together. And to the degree that people are getting a whole plant experience, they're actually getting a more healthy, a better, more nutritional, and more value-added experience as well.
So, a lot of people they're interested in the industry. They want to get into it, and there's a right way and a wrong way of getting into it. And for so long, a lot of people in general are used to buying from their homies on the street and things like that, not knowing that the safer way to go is to come to a Kinfolk to buy it because it's been tested, it's been graded, things like that. So what is the proper way for someone who has aspirations of getting into the industry, but they just don't know where to start? Should they reach out to like a Kinfolk and say like, do you guys need growers, or, like remove your ego and stop thinking that you have to just start at the top and, work your way up to becoming like a startup pretty much?
Go ahead. No,
I can talk to that. I mean, because given that this is like my first cannabis job, I definitely was one of the people that was like, how do I get in there? Like, I need to just start a dispensary, or I need to just find somebody that can like make edibles or something like that. But I think research is definitely the first step. Like, if you Google and then you find out that like Kinfolk exists or something like that, reach out in a professional way. A lot of times we get like, y'all hiring in like our DMs.
Right.
And
all the time.
Like every day. And that is not the way. And then even if I'm like, well, send your resume, then it's kind of at that point where like, but you thought DMing was the way to go. Right. So it's just like relax and apply how you would apply to like any job. Like look on Indeed, like look at, the companies around you and just relax a little bit, because it is exciting. It's exciting to be like, I want to get in the industry. I want to sell weed. I want to do all of this. But, I still like to say like, we're professional. Like we have a job to do. Like we're still selling things. It's not like, oh, everybody's going to be homies and come in and we're just going to like get high at work.
Structure.
Yeah, it's structure. It's a job. And like, we don't want no DMs. So yeah.
People, a lot of times when we're looking for positions, and there have been a number of people that we've hired over the years that have been friends of someone that we trust and we know. We tend to trust and know our employees, right? A lot of the bud tenders that we bring in to work have been recommended by existing bud tenders as someone that we look at. Kinfolk, prior to Kinfolk, MWC, we're out and about. We're very approachable sort of people. Making a relationship with us, helping us to understand who you are, actually helps us to make that decision a lot better when it's time to hire XYZ person. So when we're looking for a receptionist, and a receptionist who already works for us and is doing a great job comes in and says, I know someone, that's a trusted voice, right? And so I say all of that to say that don't just hit my DMs up, hit theirs, right? Make a relationship with them, right? Get to know them. But a large part of it is what something you just hit on too, which is a lot of people have ego, right? And they want to leave their stable 9-to-5 job as a middle manager and suddenly become the entrepreneur of a startup. And that's a radical shift that a lot of people aren't ready for. A lot of people think that because they can make a good brownie at home, that they can build a shelf, build a business, hire people, deal with HR issues, and do all of this other sort of stuff. And they're met with what I call radical surprise, when it doesn't really work out as effectively as they thought. So there is something to be said about getting in and seeing kind of how all the pieces kind of work. and humbling yourself enough to come in and do a job, even if only for a couple of years, and then try your hand at starting something or maybe partnering with the business that you work with to help launch something. There are a number of entrepreneurs that are in and around DC that, would tell you that either I or some of the people at Kinfolk have been instrumental to helping them start their businesses. And we certainly like that about what we do, but it's something that we do. We spend that kind of time on people that we believe in, people that we trust are serious about what they are trying to do, and people that are actually capable of doing it.
So I have a question, and it kind of speaks to what we talked about initially. When the idea of, you guys were Metropolitan Wellness before Kinfolk, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so before you guys even became a company, what was the process like of even getting your foot in the door with licensing and things like that?
That's a beast, bro.
It sounds like an intricate process.
It's
very detailed.
It's the burden of writing a license application is huge, right? It's not something you can do in a vacuum in a closet by yourself. You need advisors, and some of those advisors are your architect, advisors and service providers. You need an architect to help with your security plan, help with your layout, your diagramming, and so there are fees associated. You need lawyers to help with your legal structure, your partnership structures, to make sure that you're structured properly for whatever license it is you're kind of going out there, and you're not walking in the door violating some structuring issues. You need lawyers to help you interpret, understand not just the law, but also the regulations that enact the law. So that as you're talking about things in your application, you're not sitting here violating the actual, your plan doesn't violate the actual regulations that you're going to actually use to operate or that govern you. You need a team, right? You need to be able to talk about not just you and how much you desire and how much you feel like you deserve it. Frankly, regulators don't care, right? What they really care about is not only are you going to be successful, but are you going to be impactful? And so that implies who else is with you. What are some of your team's missions in the community and different things like that? There are places where you have to talk about all of that. You need to talk about it in a way that is aligned with those that are judging you. That's why when we first did District Growers, which is the cultivation operation that I own, and when Metropolitan Wellness was done, we didn't choose names like Kinfolk, right? The market would not accept that at that point in time, right? They needed names that said wellness. They needed names welcoming names, safe sounding names, right? The unfortunate reality is that no one really remembers a term like Metropolitan Wellness Center. It's too hard, right? They can remember MWC, right? They can remember that we're on Capitol Hill, but we decided to later on change the name and kind of go after something else. So when you're going through that licensing process, you have to think about all of these mechanics of judgment. There's someone that's reading this who has to say whether or not you're safe enough, whether or not your plan has a shot at working, whether or not your team is good enough. Is your layout well thought out? Is it in compliance? And all of these different things that kind of come together. My first application in DC was over 430 pages long. And that's not including drawings and other sorts of attachments, just the application and the appendices to the application was that. Then there was all of this support documentation that we attached to different appendices and stuff like that. So they get big. And, I guess that speaks in part to the city's understanding of cannabis or lack thereof, and their need to feel like they need to know.
So was DC like the ideal location for when you guys wanted to start? Because I know you're from DC. You from DC as well?
I'm originally from Tennessee.
Okay.
But I had lived in DC since '98.
I'm from Los Angeles.
Oh, you're from Los Angeles? Okay,
Detroit.
Sorry about that.
I'm from PG County.
You're homegrown. I asked that because I know some states have like unlimited licenses, and that allows it's like I don't want to say it's like a free market, but it kind of dilutes the the process and making of standing out pretty much. And so that's why I asked was DC the ideal location because
So, you
I know
know,
that DC is new with implementing like regulation with marijuana. So
yeah, Vanessa and I had operated in kind of like a free-for-all market, right? That was San Diego when we first.
because California is one of those states that has unlimited license.
Unlimited license, but at the time, at the time they had no licensing, right? You know, other than the law having been passed, there was no licensing structure. And what we saw was that overnight, anyone who could get access to a lease suddenly became a dispensary or a delivery service or something like that. And you know, there's one side of us that wants to say, well, that's how it should be. That's great, right? But there's another side of us that says, well, there is a public safety concern, right? You know, people don't want a liquor store on every corner. They don't want even a grocery store on every corner. They don't want a gas station on every corner. They don't want gun stores on every corner. They feel the same about cannabis stores. And just using City of San Diego, city proper, as an example, they went from 9 when we first bought the San Diego Medical Collective. I'm sorry, 30 when they first bought the San Diego Medical Collective to 238 in 2.5 years. More dispensaries than coffee shops.
Wow.
So when you see that's bananas, right? And so if left unchecked, you will have. But there are all sorts of reasons why we shouldn't want that in Washington D.C., right? And I recognize that I'm talking right now as from the perspective of someone who has one, right? And so I'll yield to any viewer that has that opinion that I may be influenced because I have one. But the reality is that if I wanted another, I could probably get another. And so whether it's competitive or not, I've also proven I can win one.
Right.
But if we think about how the market is actually structured, and if we think about what's healthiest for this market, and if we want to create the biggest, best market that we can for people who aspire to provide the kind of services that some people may have, whether they're marketing, whether they're advisory, whether they're you name it, accounting services and things like that, then we need some big capable buyers, right? If everyone is making a few $1,000s a day, then we're not buying premium services.
Right.
So you know what? That team of Black or Hispanic or Latino entrepreneurs out there, or that team of women-owned or you name it, operators out there don't really have people or businesses that can actually afford to hire them. So there's a whole segment of the marketplace that just goes missed, right? We don't have good producers because the dispensaries are all caught in this bitter war and unable to adequately stock their shelves. Nobody's buying brand management services. Nobody's buying public relations services. Nobody's buying event planners and different things like that.
Nobody's investing into their business.
Nobody's investing in their business because they don't have margin. Right. And so in an ideal world, what I think you have is a finite number of dispensaries, you have a finite number of grow, and then you have an infinite number of service providers that can engage in R&D, that can do the ancillary service, that can provide testing, that can provide concentrate processing, can provide distillate style services and stuff like that. That can also touch cannabis. And then what you'll see is some of the same things we've seen in other markets where now we're creating $75,000 a year manufacturing jobs. Now we're creating jobs that will allow people to actually live in the city again, right? And then when you think about like Washington D.C.'s market, the way my team and I have looked at it, we look at it like if you were to actually legalize cannabis for adult use in Washington, D.C., you have the opportunity to create what I project would be somewhere in the area of 3,000 jobs, right? Where are those going to go, right? In wards 3, 2, 4, And 6, you probably don't have 3,000 people that need a job. You know what I mean? Like we're talking about 5, 7, and 8, right? And for the people who live in those other wards, when they're looking, they're probably not looking to provide those kinds of jobs or looking for those kinds of jobs anyway. So we're talking about bringing higher income jobs to 5, 7, 8, and 1, right? You know, and so from that standpoint, I want to see a healthy market, whatever that means, right? I don't care if there is, 5, 10 more dispensaries. That doesn't kill me in a recreational market. We'll still be who we are. We're Kinfolk. We'll be great. I don't care about there being 3 to 5, 10 more grows. We're district growers. We'll still be great, right? That doesn't change the fact that we grow great cannabis. What I'm concerned about are those people that want to be R&D for the industry, those people that want to be great brand managers for the industry, people who provide the services to help our businesses and have expertise centers that I can never truly afford to in-house the way I want to in-house, right? But I can certainly go to someone who can now afford to focus on this industry to help us be better and be world competitive. Right, we can't get that if everyone is just owning a little corner store, and that's just the reality of that.
That makes a lot of sense. So for so long, the marijuana industry has been looked down upon as if it was something poisonous compared to the tobacco industry or the alcohol industry. Why do you think that the marijuana industry for so long, it took so long for the government to understand how to properly place a tax on it so it can quote unquote become legal? It's not fully legalized, but it's like 1 foot in, 1 foot out.
Racism.
I think race has a big part to do with that.
Facts.
Absolutely, I think it's the biggest part. But I mean, I think you were about to say something.
I was going to say, there's definitely a lot of historical implications, mostly centered around racism and oppressing Black and brown people and using cannabis to do that. It's still stigmatized, and that's something that we have to work towards sort of dismantling. Even just us talking about THC versus CBD, calling THC psychoactive can be, problematic. I think that's definitely a word that people who are anti-marijuana use to describe it, when THC is, it causes euphoria. So just even in the way that we speak about cannabis, we need to be mindful of the words that we use. And then just making sure that we're educated and we're passing on valuable, scientific information to consumers is really, really important. Do you guys have anything to add to that?
Yeah, going into just like racism and the things like that of just like cannabis being like looked at as evil, from what I read in the history that I know, feel free to chime in, is that like back in the like jazz era, and obviously cannabis can enhance your creativity and stuff like that. So like jazz players and musicians and stuff like that were in clubs and they were, playing their songs, they were getting everybody excited. And then white women were like falling in love with the Black jazz musicians. And so then they were saying things like, weed makes white women want Black men and like crazy stuff like that. And then, probably just hating because like jazz music was lit and Black people were being happy and dancing and things like that. So like that was the history that I know. And then whoever the person was that can make cannabis be looked at as evil was the person that was like, this is on the same level as heroin and crack and XYZ.
A gateway drug.
Exactly. But like for me, I just never understood, just even this day and age, it's just if you drink alcohol, I feel like you should have no say on anything on cannabis. If you don't know what you're talking about, I'm just gonna be like, so you drink that whole bottle of liquor and I'll smoke this whole bag of weed and we'll see who feels better in 5 minutes, really, or the next day, or who's even alive the next day. And it's like, I feel like that's a simple argument. And then if you actually read and like see why cannabis is like looked at like this, it's kind of just like it's right there. Read it. So what's the issue? And usually people don't have anything to say, but
So it's interesting that you guys brought up race because that has a lot to do with funding as well. The marijuana industry is it's a costly industry to get into, and I was reading an article about the Safe Bank Act about how it's close to being brought into to help marijuana businesses get funded through banks, but a lot of banks are not really giving money to dispensaries or marijuana industries because they just don't feel like it's a safe business. And they just don't, there's still a lot of regulations behind how to really manage it and work through it. So what was the process like of getting funding for this? Was it, because I know there's so much upfront cost that has to be provided.
Yeah, Kinfolk is internally funded.
Okay.
Right. We didn't have banks. I and my business partner, Mike Thrill, and Anthony Bedard, put up all the money for this, with the majority of it coming from me. I'll tell you that, one, you're right, it is a heavy lift. It's not inexpensive to come to an area like downtown DC or Capitol Hill DC, take a space that's not even supposed to be built out for a cannabis business, put in a place where the city literally doesn't want you to be successful, right? Because when we first got a license, the city, wasn't allowing us to be as forward as Kinfolk is right now. They put us in an attic above a Popeyes, right? And so, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so,
gotta walk up those steps.
Right, yeah, walk up these steps that, not everybody can get up, the elderly can't get up, the handicapped can't get up. And we gotta figure out how to take 850 square feet and turn it into a successful dispensary, right? That requires money, right? That requires a team of people that have to be paid. People aren't into missing paychecks, right? And so you got to be not only a good payer, but you got to be a good payer all the time, on time. Right. It requires a lot. So we were able to fund that, and we were able to go through the first year or two of, dry market, for lack of a better phrase. But luckily, the medical marijuana market took off. Then the administration put the clamps down. So I say all that to say that, people look at the cannabis industry like it's lucrative. It's also, you're right, costly to get into. Banks don't provide financing. I testified on Capitol Hill for the Safe Banking Act when it was in committee, in the Banking and Finance Committee. And I testified for it because I believe in it. But I also know that just because it passes doesn't necessarily mean banks are going to bank our industry. Banks don't bank liquor stores right now, right? And there are plenty of just everyday run-of-the-mill industries that banks won't bank, right? And so just because you pass it doesn't necessarily mean we'll have access to banking. What we'll probably have access to, though, is merchant services, right? And it's that chipping away at the things we don't have access to that will eventually cause the dam to break and everything to flow. There will be some banks that will say, hey, well, wait a minute, I can get market share by focusing on this industry, but don't think that Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and the big bellwether banks are just going to suddenly become lovers of the cannabis industry. They're going to continue to give us the finger, right? But the credit unions that are local, they'll start to do business with us, and through them we'll get banking, a history of bank performance, right? Then we will perhaps start to get loans, and when we can then show a history as an industry of servicing loans, more banks will want to lend to the industry. But right now, it's my guess, maybe I'm being pessimistic here, that even if you pass the Safe Banking Act, they're probably going to look at us the same way that they look at liquor stores, clubs, different things like that. They're going to categorize us that way, and we're still going to have to probably be at least 40 to 60% still cash and self-funded. Yeah, loans, not for us. if you think that they're suddenly going to start lending to minority-owned businesses,
Wishful thinking.
wishful thinking, wishful thinking. But I do believe that you'll have investors that will feel more comfortable providing debt financing. And so you may have private entities or high net worth individuals that will come in and structure a package of debt for you.
More so going like the seed funding route.
More, yeah. When you're doing your initial funding, but I doubt if you'll be able to get it done during. And you'll probably still have to give up significant levels of equity in order to start one of these if you don't have the money to do it yourself. But it's certainly the case that there will be a number of other accessible opportunities, right? Social equity actually puts an interesting little dynamic in the ability to kind of fund a business in this space. When you think of the way most social equity programs are working around the country right now, social equity applicants are given a first mover advantage, right? So you come to a city like DC, let's suppose you have social equity applications, right? If you look at the way the mayor's bill is and the way the chairman's bill is, both of those bills to tax and regulate cannabis give a first mover advantages to guys like myself who are in the medical marijuana program, as well as social equity applicants. That means that the premium locations in the city will likely be targeted by those first movers. So if you're an investor and you're trying to invest in the best business, provided this guy has a team, he has a better location, he or she has better whatever, they should be able to get access to the funding. And if they have the right investor base and if they're capitalized properly, they should be able to get access to loans. If they don't, then we get to ask a different question, right? Like, what's different? What's going on?
So before we wrap up, I just want to ask you two more questions. District growers. Can you explain what that is? And because you're the owner of District Growers.
Yeah, I own District Growers. We're a licensed cultivation operation. We supply the medical marijuana program with flowers, concentrates, edibles. We have a line of topicals that are going to be coming out here pretty soon that feature some pretty interesting opportunities. And we are one of the original license winners in Washington, D.C. One of the original cultivation center licenses in Washington, D.C.
Okay. So if somebody wants to get their medical marijuana card, what's the process? Specifically talking in DC.
Okay. So it starts with a doctor's visit.
Okay.
Well, actually, it starts with pulling up information, right? Okay. You go to the ABRA website. You can get access to the steps that you need to go through. But it's really see the doctor, get a recommendation, fill out an application, get access. Initially, it was see the doctor, prove that you really need access. Now it's super simple. We're seeing people who just need to sleep better, or people who just want to better manage anxiety, people who just need some pain relief, people who just want to feel better, get access to the medical marijuana program. I'm happy that people like Vanessa, myself, some of the other dispensary and cultivation center owners fought the battle with the city to make it a conversation between just the patient and the doctor, and it didn't have to need approval. You didn't have to approve what this doctor was saying at the Department of Health, and so it's very easy to get access in Washington D.C. And if you call Kinfolk, our people downstairs will actually walk through the process with you. They'll help you find a doctor that will see you. They will help you set up a doctor's appointment that you can Skype to from your home. And then once you've done that, they'll actually help you set up the actual application and make it all very easy for you, tell you where to send it. And then, a few days later, you'll get your card in the mail.
Sounds easy.
And then you can come kick it with Kinfolk.
I'm a proud card carrier member.
All right.
So
thank you.
I've been a card carrier member for about a year now. So
as am I.
Yeah. So I'm happy to support you guys. Before we wrap up, is there any events or social media, anything that you guys got going on? Spill it, share it, so the good people will know.
Yes, we are on all social media platforms. You can follow us on Instagram at Kinfolk Dispensary. We're on Facebook at Kinfolk DC, Twitter at Kinfolk DC, LinkedIn, Kinfolk Dispensary, YouTube, Kinfolk Dispensary. And then these are our hours, our address, our website that you can go to find out any information you need. We'll be having a lot of different events coming up, so feel free to reach out if y'all want to partner with events, and just check our social media for new initiatives.
And we TikTok.
And we TikTok. We do it all. We're all over the internet.
Vanessa, any last words or anything?
No.
Sure. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you
Thank you for coming.
for reaching out.
Thank you.
This was dope. And this is good, y'all. I'm not even lying. It's lit.
Facts.
This is good. I'm drinking
No doubt.
liquid gold right now.
This is a very informative episode. We touched on a lot of good topics. Hoping that more people can get in the industry and start where you can start. Don't try to supersede the steps. Go through every process. You can have the knowledge and the fortitude to prepare yourself to become a startup and a formidable startup like Kinfolk. So this is the Do Something Good Today podcast. You can find us on all streaming platforms, Apple, Spotify, anywhere you listen to podcasts, YouTube, you can find us. Thank you so much, guys, for the hospitality. This was wonderful.
Thank you.
This is Do Something Good Today podcast, and we out.